as you guys know, I often make my notes for the show on Twitter. So some people may have already seen this, but this is what I put out today. Just for clarity for the ignorant. Free speech legislation in New Zealand comes under freedom of expression and gives you that, and this is a direct quote from the legislation, quote, right to freedom of expression means you have the right to seek, receive, and provide, in brackets, impart, information and opinions of any kind in any form. This would include whistles. That last part's not part of the legislation, but I'm just saying, of any form, this would include whistles. Technically, the men at the Julian Batchelor meeting censored Victoria Jacob's free speech. Anyone want to defend her right to free speech? Which has obviously put a few cats amongst the pigeons because it hasn't been part of the conversation. The other thing was, for people who are claiming that the event was private, so removal of Victoria Jacobs was fine, are wrong. An assault is, and this is again from legislation, an act of intentionally applying or attempting to apply force to the person of another. That's it. And there is nothing in legislation that puts a private setting in the legislation to mitigate what an assault is. So I'm real sorry to have to be the bearer of bad tidings. It was an assault, and she did get her free speech impinged upon. Now, this is the whole debate. When you have two parties, both with rights to speak, both with rights to speech, and they try to drown each other out, that is an issue. You can't go, those people have more rights than those people. That's not how free speech works. That's not how freedom of expression works. Just because you've booked a hall doesn't mean you get to assault someone because their speech is drowning out your speech. Now, you might have the opinion that you should be able to. Fine, we can debate that. But I'm telling you legally, you don't have a right to do that. And I hope, and there's a very good chance we'll be talking to Victoria Jacobs this week. I've already heard from a mutual connection that she wants to talk to us. So hopefully we will. But I hope she brings charges, because if you're seeing it, charges being laid for things like tomato juice, then you need to see charges being laid for this kind of physical assault, meaning touching, unwanted touching. You need them to be there. The other thing I did, Chewy, was I put out there, I got this is the legislation, so people know. Your right to freedom of expression is you have the right to seek, receive, and provide information and opinions of any kind or any form. So there it is in writing. That's another thing. I'll go on to the next thing in a minute about free speech union. But there's part one, Chewy.
I mean, one thing that I want to say about that, right, is often with legislation, right, you don't get necessarily everything meshing together really well. So, I mean, there would be a question there for me, and I'd love to discuss it with someone, or if someone knows more about this sort of stuff than I do in the chat, fucking have at it. But that makes it very clear that you can go and get or talk about whatever you want without much interference.
Yeah.
But then how does that play with, say, inciting racial hatred?
If there's a call to action, that could make a difference, right? And
but if I wanted to hire a hall and just basically do a PowerPoint lecture on, actually Hitler had some pretty good ideas and I want to expand on those.
Yep.
And people quite rightly did not like that.
Yep.
You can go, oh, but it's my freedom of expression. But then that crashes into inciting racial hatred.
Well, with respect, I think under the freedom of speech, freedom of expression laws, if there's not an explicit call to violence or an explicit call to action, so if your speech in it you were saying, and so now we need to go out and find people of Jewish origin and smash them up, that would be the line. So if it's just theories and words, it's protected. But what you can do is if someone else who doesn't like that speech wants to drown that speech out. And look, there's this conversation going around at the moment about civil discourse. Like, I just can't imagine all those people, like in the 1980s, right, with apartheid. Did you know that that it was well known that Nelson Mandela heard about what happened in Waikato when the protesters stopped the game between the Spring Boks? He heard about that in Ellis Island, and it gave him strength to continue his fight. Does anyone want to go back now and go, oh, those protesters during apartheid, they should have been civil. They should have just sat outside the stadium and let the game go on. Like, I'm not saying that I want to hear violence or I want to see it or anything like that, but this call from people like the Free Speech Union for civil discourse. I'm actually about civil discourse. I'm cool with civil discourse, but it's not like a foundational necessity for things like protest. Sometimes civil, great. Sometimes loud and raucous. But in my opinion, never violent. That's my position, right? Others disagree with it. There are people in various groups who think violence is the answer. Not mine. Sometimes civil, sometimes loud and raucous, never violent. But there seems to be some who are basically saying, and I'm exaggerating on purpose here, but like, oh look, you brown people are just protesting in the wrong way. You need to protest in the way that we deem okay.
That's absolutely a thing.
You women, you are just protesting in the wrong way. You minority, you need to protest in the approved way, the way that the majority have approved you to protest. It's like, well, no, that's not how it works.
That's actually a really good point. Look at literally any protest lately, right? And I'll talk about both sides. Like I will talk about the parliamentary protest as well, right? That's always a common thing that people say. Well, you know, they're protesting wrong. You know, the guys that are gluing themselves to the highways to stop oil or to railway lines to stop coal and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to sort of go, oh yeah, that's my team, but I don't agree with how they did that. I mean, you talk about, you know, being uncomfortable with violence. Look, I would say read up on how Liverpool treated Oswald Mosley.
I know. Look, I've got it. I'm just saying, for me, that would be a line. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be involved in any kind of violent response as a form of protest. And I know people do, and I actually will denounce it. We have different opinions. People on the left and the right would think violence is okay in some instances. I don't. Mine is civil discourse, great. Sometimes loud and raucous, great. Never violent. That's where my personal
I would say
is.
Seldom violent. Yeah.
Well, can I put it this? Can I put it? Let me put it this way.
Hit in the face with a brick in the early days, I think.
Yeah, but we're not talking. We're not talking hypothetical. I guess I'm talking in reality today. I mean, when I say never violent, what I'm also saying is never instigating. Like if, for example, you were at a peaceful protest and you were, approached and attacked and violence was committed on you, a response, I'm not saying is inappropriate, but I'm just saying for me, like, I mean, we've said it, the Albert Park situation, they should never have gone past those barriers. They should never have gone past those barriers, in my opinion. Some people are going to say that's exactly the right thing to do. I don't think so. I support your right.
I think we both said that on the day, actually.
100%.
When those barriers came down, that was a big turning point.
And where we need to be, all of us, right, is if you can't accept, right, that I think that the barriers shouldn't have been crossed, and I can't accept that you've got a different position, then we're at an impasse, right? And this is what has happened to this show before, and I know we don't talk about this anymore, and I promise we wouldn't, when we got thrown out of the boat. It's like we are actually still in the same sea. We might be in our own little boat sailing behind all the big ones, but you know, we'll fill your sails. But you're not going to get me involved, or you're not going to get me to ever support the idea of violence when it comes to protest. You're just not. Not when I say violence, I'm saying again, initiating violence. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, for this woman that got assaulted at the Julian Batchelor thing, you know, my first thought is that's not the way that I would have done it. You know, I had plans to sneak in here. I had plans to disrupt. I noticed that someone in Dunedin did something very similar, but with a bit more class than what I was going to do. Is they dressed up like a monkey, and they just danced around the venue in front of Julian, just distracting everybody. Yeah, I mean the whistle thing is incredibly annoying, but that's fine. Protest is annoying sometimes.
Let's have a look at some of the other thoughts that came through on Twitter today. And I'm sorry, I'm not just trying to put up my own Twitter feed here just to show everyone, look what I've been tweeting, but it's where I do notes.
It's actually not Twitter anymore, by the way, Pat. It's
fuck off. I know. Hello, 1990s are calling Elon. They want their fucking X back. So here we go.
Elon wants his X back too.
This is the other thing. This is the other thing that I've been thinking of today. The silence is deafening from Speak Up for Women after an assault of a woman, Victoria Jakob, by multiple men and call to pull her pants down at a Julian Batchelor meeting. It's as if this woman doesn't serve the narrative of Speak Up for Women New Zealand. And it's weird that. And then I went on to also say, pretty quiet over there as well as the Free Speech Union seems less keen to jump to the defence of this women's speech in defence of racially charged undertones of Julian Batchelor's speech. Makes you think. And that flowed into a few conversations today as well. Speak Up for Women responded to me. They didn't put out a comment about this, but they responded to me. And they did exactly what I just said before. They said, you know, they should be able to protest within reason. So in other words, do it the correct way and we will stand by it. I'll read it out for you. We're all in favour of free speech. Should be able to, and people should be able to protest within reason. They should certainly be able to do so without being physically attacked and without threats of having their clothing removed. We don't imagine the same threat would be made towards a man. We don't know enough about the nature of her protesting to comment on whether the protesting was reasonable or force was appropriate. So they don't know enough about it. Well, let's say they don't know enough about that. However, an article that came out this morning at 7 a.m. They seem to have enough knowledge about that one 4 hours later to say something very similar. Whether it's drag queen story time or anti-co-governance meeting, lawful gatherers must be protected. So the lawful gatherings must be protected. Now, that says to me the Free Speech Union are definitely coming on down on the side of Julian Batchelor because they're talking about protecting the gatherings. Now, again, technically from what we're talking about free speech, Victoria Jakob was exercising her free speech in a legal way. Annoying, frustrating, wanting to be gone, but a legal way. The Free Speech Union has come down on the side of the racially charged comments, supporting that and not the other. The right to protest must be fiercely guarded, but actions in protest to prevent the speaking rights of others cannot be allowed. So what they're literally saying is we're happy to back up suppressing the speech of the protesters to protect the speech of the rally holders. And in this instance, it's protecting the speech of the racist. We'll do that by saying that the protesters must have their speech oppressed. And this is what I was saying earlier about someone's right can lead to someone else's oppression. They both have the right to free speech. It is a political statement for the Free Speech Union to back up Julian Batchelor's free speech and denounce the protesters' free speech. And this is why I said last week, in my opinion, the Free Speech Union is a psyop, is a front, is a cover that many people, some on the left, have fallen for to further right-wing talking points predominantly. Yeah, they'll throw the odd left-wing thing in there as well, like they'll defend a story time, a drag queen story time, but the majority of what they do, have a look at what they're doing, is defending and upholding right-wing talking points in the guise of free speech. Because here's an example, an exact example of them saying Julian Batchelor's free speech must be protected, the protesters' free speech cannot be allowed. That's what they're saying. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, like freedom of speech isn't, is it freedom from criticism? Isn't freedom from a counter argument? It isn't like just no contest, say whatever you want. If you want to say something that's as dreadful as Julian Batchelor's touring around, and you're going to do something as despicable as just stop, like literally stop Māori coming into the venues by saying it's a, and he goes, oh no, it's only obvious protesters that we're stopping. Yes, obvious by their skin color. Yes, we get it, Julian, you're a racist. It's at that point that I go, okay, cool. Like if you hadn't been doing that, sure, I'll just stand outside. But the moment that you start being a dick like that, then I'll use the privilege that I've got, which is my skin color, to come in and cause fucking ruckus. While the other people that you won't let in are out the side with PA. God, I love portable Bluetooth speakers.